morning, everybody. Today is Tuesday, June 2nd, for those of you who need the update on what day we are at. I am Ann Koontz. I'm here with my partners, Marina Parkin and Jackie Durham. As usual, we're on our Tuesday, Thursday update as to what's new in the world of all things PPP and EIDL and stimulus related. We had originally told you last week that we would be coming to you this week with some specific guidance on the loan forgiveness, and we were anticipating having a course specifically designed for self-employed folks like realtors, etc. We were intending to do that, but then this weekend happened, so here we are with another change in the play calling. So with today's Audible, you'll see why we're not going to be doing that course this week. We're going to give you today an update on what's new with PPP, the most recent piece of legislation to pass the House. And then Jackie's going to give us a little bit of an update on comparison between PPP and EIDL. So we will be fielding questions. If you would please put those in the Q&A portion of the chat of the webinar box rather than in the chat, so we can handle them and make sure we've got your questions answered. Also, as always, this webinar will be recorded and distributed to you automatically. It will also be available on our Facebook page, on our web page, and on our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to get us. So, Marina, tell me a little bit about the the latest and greatest here, and maybe we can argue about this with everybody on PPP.
So first of all, it is now become a law and I guess an act, and it now has a name, and the name is Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act. And it has been passed through the House, and right now it is in Senate. So it's got to move through its steps. When we read some of the proposed changes that the House has voted on, and read some of the ideas on what the Senate may change, we decided to sort of stop the press and stop telling you exactly what you should be adhering to for the current loan. So I wanted to just highlight some of the proposed changes as of this act right now that's passed through the House. What they're proposing is to have the loan term go from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. And this is the biggest change because this has been the issue that's been criticized the most because people who have applied early and got the funds were still closed, particularly those that were closed, shut down by government, like restaurants or medical offices. And when they got the money, they were still not reopened, and they may still not be reopened. I mean, some of the restaurants I think are getting close to their 8-week loan period, and they're still only working at partial capacity. So this has been an issue that's been criticized the most, and so the House proposes to go from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. The other big change that they're proposing is to take the salary requirement from being 75% of the loan to be spent on payroll for it to be 60%. That is also a huge change, and again, that's been a criticism for those that have high rent and maybe they had to stop paying rent, and now they may have 2 or 3 months of rent that they're behind and could really use the money to pay rent, which would push them over the 25% allowed non-payroll costs. So that issue is still out there. The other issue is the ability to possibly fix the workers that have left or the salaries that you had to reduce to go from June 30th deadline to December 31st. So that's the other thing that's fairly big and proposed. And then if you do end up with a loan, if not all of it is forgiven, the proposal is to take that loan from 2 years to 5 years. I think the rate stays the same at 1% at the moment, but the loan term would go from 2 years to 5 years. So those are some of the highlighted proposed terms. I believe there's a couple of other things, but those are the big things. And that's why we don't want to keep, harping on what we had talked about last week, because if the loan term changes, if the allocation of payroll versus non-payroll cost changes, if your safe harbor date to fix your payroll changes, then the whole application and the instructions have to change. So I think that it's important to bring that up. I read an article yesterday in Journal of Accountancy, and right now the Senate is looking at this that's passed by the House. So one of the things that the Senate is fighting with the House on is the duration of the loan. So the Senate is proposing for the 8 weeks to become 16 weeks, not 24. So there's the argument there on the term. And at this point, the Senate is pretty set on 75% still to be used for payroll costs and only 25 to be used for non-payroll costs. So there has really not been anything to change as to what the allowed non-payroll costs are, and we discussed those at great lengths last week in the past, where it being the mortgage interest and the rent and utilities. So that part has not yet changed. But with all of the changes, I feel like I don't trust anything that may come or as a result of this. So we just have to kind of stay tuned. But just FYI, the other thing is, because of the time frame of the changes, there's still no real due date as to when these loan forgiveness applications are due. So I think that if the 8 week loan duration period or the forgiveness period extends, on one hand, if you feel like you've properly used up all of the PPP funds, there's no reason to hold off submitting the loan forgiveness application. On the other hand, if you have not used up all of the PPP funds properly, let's say maybe you got too much and maybe you did have to cut some salaries and had to rehire somebody, and you could use another payroll run to use up the funds, there's no reason to submit the forgiveness application early. So then that does give you the opportunity. So I think right now there's really no immediate rush to start filling out that application and get that going until we really know more as to how long the loan period is. Because one of the issues we're hearing from our clients consistently is that when they initially applied for the loan, they may have used, let's say, their gross commissions, and the loan was bigger. And then in light of the new regulation where you can only use the net income to calculate your forgiveness in the case of, for example, a self-employed individual, now your loan is too high and not all of it is going to get forgiven. So I think in light of these changes, a person like that may actually see a benefit. There may be some other expenses that you can use it or change the ratio. So really stay tuned, and I think that it will provide an opportunity for some of the people to get more of the forgiveness than not. I just wanted to point out one interesting article in this Forbes, in the Forbes article, one interesting paragraph that I thought was great. And it said that the biggest problem with the new regulation is that you will likely need a lawyer, accountant, and advanced degree in mathematics to figure out how to calculate the forgivable portion of the loan. The government, once again, did not realize the administrative burden these rules place on business owners at a time when they're trying to figure out how to survive. So and
they don't have money for lawyers and accountants and advanced degrees.
Absolutely.
It's an increased burden at a time when not only is your time supply short, but their resources to get professional assistance are short. That's a tough spot to be in. I know I get emails every single day where, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
I get emails every single day where people are like, I have a question, and it's not a question, it's a soliloquy. It's taller than I am, and it's like, I know those are exactly my questions, and it's tough to respond to those and not sound sarcastic. Like, I don't know either. Every time I start to say I think I know, then this happens. So
yes.
So that makes it tough too. And I know people are frustrated and anxious, but this is like the worst job ever, and I always have the terrible topics, but this is even worse.
Well, if I can add something, I've been having some discussions with different lenders to get their take on a few different items, including the forgiveness application. And I will say that there are several lenders who are not even processing forgiveness applications at this point because of all the changes that are underway. So, for some of you, if you've already gotten through your 8-week period and you've used up all your loan proceeds, or you can otherwise benefit from some of the safe harbors or exemptions that are in place right now, and your lender is in fact accepting those forgiveness applications, I would get those in now if your lender is even accepting them. But there is you know, I know we're not going to go into a bunch of detail into what exactly is in this act, because the Senate is likely going to change it slightly, but we have a lot more of the alphabet soup of the additional safe harbors that are going to be available for employers who can't bring people back, who are unable to restore their business activity to the same level within a certain time frame due to governmental restrictions and shutdown orders. So it truly is meant to provide more flexibility, and I think it will, depending on what it ultimately looks like. But I don't want to waste anyone's time, nor do Joanne and Marina, getting into the specifics of this law until we know in fact what it's going to look like when it comes out of the Senate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's no way to predict that. Even if you're keeping up on the discussion back and forth, it's, well, they say they're going to do this and they say they're going to do that. That's not what these things end up looking like, which, to be honest, is why we've been a little bit quiet about this. But we decided today we needed to at least tell you this is what they're kicking around. You know, there was one last week, Jack, that you know, there was no possibility of pass 2 weeks ago, I guess. No possibility of passing, so we didn't even go into that. But this definitely has some legs. This passed the House 416-1, so there's only one opponent, which means this is, you know, at least worthy of some discussion. But they told us for how many weeks in a row they were not going to change the 8-week period, and here we are. Now it's how long are we going to extend it when they set so firmly in how many pieces of guidance that was not going to change.
Yeah, they were very firm on the 8-week period, and that's why the extension of the 8-week, where that, to me, from everything we've read, that was always the biggest issue, because the businesses were not open at the time when they got the funds. Everything else could be up and down, but that was one of those things that was highly criticized. So it is nice extension that's being talked about. One of the things that I don't think will change is going back to that whole thing, did you really need the money? And that is still going to be the issue, in that if you really had no business getting this loan, if you really didn't have the economic necessity, and you didn't have enough factors to prove it, I'm still telling my clients, because I get those questions too consistently, is you should probably give the loan back if you don't feel like you can support, you know, with the factors that you'd had the economic uncertainty, and that the funds were necessary at the time. Any other thoughts, Jackie, on?
Well, what I will also say is I feel like that's a little frustrating for some borrowers, because they don't know what the future holds. There's still a lot of uncertainty. And what I would say is, I think if there is any kind of resurgence, or if it's not going to hang everyone out to dry, they'll probably come back with some more funding to help businesses if we fall into another time like we did a month ago. Now, what I also found to be a nice part of this act, if it does go forward, is the deferral and payments under the loan is being deferred under the proposed act to be when SBA determines the amount of forgiveness. And I know that we had some participants who were wondering, well, when is the due date for filing this forgiveness application? Right now, we don't have a specific deadline, but what the act does provide is that if you, basically they provide either your payment period is going to start after SBA determines the amount of forgiveness, or 10 months after the expiration of your covered period if you haven't filed that forgiveness application. So that doesn't give us a hard date of when you have to file your forgiveness application, but it does kind of give you an idea of the time frame that the government is going to give you to work with getting that application filed and getting all that information together, if that part of the act passes.
The other thing we're going to see that I think is going to frustrate people is the time frame it's going to take the banks to process those loan forgiveness applications. Keep in mind, guys, this is going to be a process, not an event. So it's not going to be like turn in your application and a week later you get an answer. I've read things saying it could be anywhere from 6 to 12 months before you know. And they're going to have to do something about that, because you've got to make payments, and your payments are going to be based on the total amount that you actually owe. They're going to have to consider the debt forgiveness in calculating what you actually owe. So this is really going to be insane. One question I've gotten repeatedly from realtors all over is people are coming to me saying, you know, income. I've lost closings, I've this, I've that. When it comes to the debt forgiveness, I got an email this morning, and I wanted to share it with you guys because it's been a sentiment that I've heard. I've answered the same email 100 times, I feel like. So this person says, does the amount of forgiveness calculated at all depend on how much is actually paid to me through the non-payroll payments? This person is a realtor on a S Corp. Or is it 100% based upon the 2019 W-2? I'm getting this a lot where people think the debt forgiveness is tied to last year. Either one of you want to touch on that?
It is tied, as of right now, it's tied to 2019. Your 8-week, which is our current covered period, and that might get expanded to 16, it might get expanded to 24 under the new act. We don't know yet. But right now, it's going to be a prorated portion of your 2019 self-employment income. It is going to be capped at that. And it's it's the same thing for not just self-employed individuals, but owner employees as well.
And partners in the partnerships. So if you are the owner of the business, if you're a partner, if you're an S Corp shareholder, or if you're just a self-employed individual, your 2019 compensation level is what drives it, which is a huge change from what was originally anticipated, where a lot of owners said, listen, I didn't take any salary, and now I want to give myself a little bump up to catch up. Or maybe they increased their salary beginning in 2020 anyway from 19 levels. Or maybe their 2019 salary was unreasonably low and now their 2020 salary is normal. That it still dings them because 2019 is the level. Again, the planning point around it is if your spouse also is an employee in the business, you can increase your spouse's compensation to make up for some of that. So there's nothing to say that cannot be done, but the owner themselves are stuck with the 2019 compensation levels, which really dings a lot of these individuals who received the loan based on the gross income. So if you take self-employed, let's say a realtor, who when the initial round of applications was going through and they were accepting your 1099 for your gross commission and calculating your PPP loan based on your gross commission not to exceed 100,000, and they got their loans of, let's say, you know, your max to 20 to 100,000, so your loan can be somewhere around 20. Well, in the meantime, their net income from the business may have only been, you know, 30,000. So now that prorated for 8 weeks is a lot lower than 20 grand. So it's really digging a lot of people now that are trying to figure out what their potential forgiveness is.
Mm-hmm. You want to do something, Jack, there?
Oh, I was just trying to, sorry, Marina, for jumping in there. I wanted to also mention that for the Schedule C filers, their expenses, their forgivable expenses are also tied to the 2019 expenses that were included on their return. So you also, if you didn't have a lease in place back in 2019, but you do in 2020, now you're not able to include those limits.
Renee's asking, she says, thoughts on this as a realtor, no income from May to June, but closing in July, that's more than the amount of PPP received. Will it still be forgiven? First, we're gonna have to see what happens with the period, because right now, it's going to end June 30th, so it's not going to matter if you have a large check in July. So, and it doesn't say that you have to have no income otherwise. So I don't think you're going to have a problem even if it is extended. But it's really about showing that the PPP funds that you did get, you still used for payroll. So it doesn't mean that the whole business had to stop and have no other income.
Absolutely.
I've gotten that question a lot from agents.
Yeah, me too.
One thing I think that gets confused by people is looking at your PPP versus unemployment.
And I think it also goes back to, I think that's more of a question of people, I've heard that question come from people with respect to, at the time I made my loan application, I didn't have these contracts in the hopper and it didn't look too good for me. But now all of a sudden I do have a contract, or if things are looking up, is that going to now disqualify me from making that certification? I don't think so. And you definitely don't have to turn away income just because you might be in your covered period. As long as you use the loan proceeds themselves properly to pay yourself up to that 2019 prorated amount, you're perfectly fine bringing in a nice closing.
And you still obviously have if you didn't have closings in May and June.
Then I will go back to my, what I was always saying is document those factors. At the time when you applied for the loan, what were the factors that made you apply? What was your thoughts on the economic uncertainty of your business? So I told a lot of my clients, let's say even if you've got work, let's say you're a builder or a subcontractor, and you may still be working on some of the older projects, but look at your historical data and say, hey, at this time last year, I had, 10 things in the hopper historically, and now I only have 2. So even though right now you may be wrapping up projects from last year, but you don't have much in the hopper coming forward. So you've got economic uncertainty, and that was your reason for applying for the loan. So documenting these factors early on are really good, because if anybody ever looks at this loan, SBA, Department of Justice, whoever, you don't want to go 3 years from now and figure out what was happening. I know things were crazy, but I still made money that year. You really want to document things now, because document all these factors that made you freak out and apply for the loan.
Yeah.
Particularly in real estate, all my realtors everybody's in the same boat. Things are empty, and then all of a sudden there's a couple of closings, there's a couple of showings, they're all doing well. This is where the uncertainty really lies, is the type of, it's your profession and these activities.
We've got one question in the chat box from Angela talking about, I thought the bank only had 60 days to advise about the loan forgiveness. And let me clarify that point. The bank does have 60 days to review your loan forgiveness application and advise of the amount of the forgiveness. However, the bank has to then pass that on to SBA, and the SBA has to approve that decision, and they have 90 days. So you're looking at right there is 5 months out of the gate if everybody sticks to what they're supposed to do. So that still leaves people dangling. It's not that your application gets no response, it's that it's not final until the SBA gives you the blessing. So that makes that a little bit of a challenge.
The 60-day clock only begins when you actually submit the application, and that's the kicker. There's no deadline set for that. The banks, we talked to a couple of banks, and on the bank side, they have not set any deadlines yet on when they want you to submit an application. Because again, they need to give the business owner an opportunity to fill out all of this disastrous paperwork and the schedules and supporting documentation and pull everything together. So they also need to give you time to, they need to give you time to get through the safe harbor. If you had to fire somebody and you have the safe harbor time period to rehire them, I wouldn't imagine that the application would be due before you had an opportunity to get into those safe harbor, fixing periods. So I think that that's where the longest time frame that I can see happening now under question is, when is the actual application due? Once you submit that, starts the 60-day clock. Once the bank gives it to SBA, starts the 90-day clock, and on and on and on. And they can change that too. They can say, oh, there's so much volume, we are going to take longer.
Everything can change. And the other thing is, right now we're talking about when is that application due. Right now, we don't have one bank that I'm aware of from the people that I've chatted with who's willing to even accept it now, even if you're outside your 8-week period and you have all your documentation and it's just you and you're ready to go. I haven't talked to any lenders who will accept that loan forgiveness application yet. Have either of you?
Nope. In fact, they're saying that they don't want to because of the chaos that ensued when everyone was submitting their PPP applications, and you had an application go in on Monday, and then Thursday the rules changed or the law changed, and these PPP applicants, now their applications are not necessarily accurate, or the rule changes are more favorable to them now, so now they're angry and they want to pull their application back. And I have even heard of practitioners who were kind enough to prepare loan applications for clients and associates, and then the rules changed days later, and whatever was on the application was not necessarily applicable at that point anymore because the rules are changing so quickly. So lenders and practitioners also likely are probably this application at this point because look at the changes that are coming down the pipe, and we aren't even certain what those changes are going to look like when they come out of Senate. So.
The one thing I have to say, I don't see the application itself getting any simplification. So any business owner looking at the stuff, it is overwhelming. It is overwhelming. It looks scary to us, and we do this sort of thing for a living. To me, the first thing I thought of when I looked at the application and instructions, it's just like a tax return. There's schedules to subschedules to supporting tables, and each one of them has their own set of instructions. And like you said, going back to when the original PPP application only had one line that had numbers on it, and it was just payroll. That's it. Everything else was signatures and please certify that this is okay. This has nothing but numbers and schedules and charts. And so it is really going to be an administrative nightmare, I think, on the businesses to pull the stuff together.
Right.
And even before you get, go ahead, Jack. Go ahead.
Well, one thing I wanted to mention, I'm not trying to turn this into a PPP therapy session, but one thing that Marina and I have lamented about.
Those are not free.
One thing that we've lamented about a little bit is in the application, it specifically asks you to confirm how many employees you have as of June 30th, which is the date that the safe harbor expires. Well, now this new act is proposing to extend that safe harbor out to December 31st. So how in the world are people going to be able to file their applications certifying how many employees they're going to have on some future date that may be as far out as the end of the year? So there's still a lot of things that I'm still not even seeing being addressed in the proposed act that need to be addressed within the application itself. Hopefully that will come after this, but it is going to be a headache.
Well, we have nothing to do tomorrow, so hopefully it comes tomorrow. I mean, it's really been unreasonable. And the thing I will say is, to your point, Marina, not only is it like a tax return from the standpoint of charts and schedules and numbers, but don't be fooled when there's words. That first section where it's just yes or no questions is not only ambiguous, there's circular references, there are terms that are not defined. So it's asking you, are you this and are you that, but this and that are not defined. So how do you know? I don't think there's no way to appreciate how absurd it is until you physically get that out and have a look at it. So back to your point of how is, the average business owner going to handle this on their own? I don't know, because you've got three skilled professionals, and we've been through all, the crisis and meltdown with TARP and the bank bailout in 2008. And this is not the first time we've read this kind of stuff nonsense, and it's not getting any better. Leslie has a question for us and says, in the proposal, we had talked about switching reducing the percentage requirement towards payroll. She's asking, will they allow any professional fees like attorney's fees or CPA fees to be part of that 25% or 40% fee that is not included, not required to be allocated to payroll? I didn't see anything.
I didn't see anything either. I only saw the change of the proposed change in the percentage, but not the allowed use of the funds. But that is a great point, because if you don't have a CPA or an attorney or an accountant helping you fill this out, and this is not going to be something that you can just call and say, what should I put on this line? Oh, put this. It's going to have to be an involved process with some extensive fees involved for sure. There's been a couple of questions on if you guys are ready to move into maybe discussing how EIDL and PPP work together. Maybe Jackie can touch on that. Joanne, sounds like you've got something.
Before we jump, I just want to mention one thing for the benefit of the group. Phyllis is saying that she spoke with someone at BMO Harris Bank, and they advised that they will not accept the current paper application that the SBA has released. Instead, they are developing their own online form, and you'll be required to use that. That's my expectation, that you'll see that with most banks. They did that with the PPP application. We distributed that to you early in our webinars to say, this is the type of information you're going to need to provide. So have that ready. But every bank pretty much had an online form and required, it was all worded a little bit differently and organized a little bit differently. Some had asked for a little bit more, but for the most part, it's really the same substance, just a little bit different form from what we saw in the PPP applications. So we expect to see the same thing moving forward on the forgiveness applications as well. Mm-hmm. With that, I'll shut up and turn that over to Jackie for the EIDL comparison.
Right, so we've gotten a few questions about people who have obtained EIDL loans and then might also be interested in obtaining a PPP loan. There is some language in the regulations that provides that if you received an EIDL loan between January 31st and April 3rd, that you may apply for a PPP loan and you may be eligible for a PPP loan. But it doesn't specifically provide for applicants who have received EIDL loans outside of that time frame. So people were sort of like, okay, does that mean that if I got an EIDL loan on April 4th or April 5th that I'm now not qualifying for a PPP loan? I've talked to a couple of lenders about this. They are still accepting applications for PPP applicants, even if an EIDL loan holder received their loan outside of that time frame. I don't know that anyone is really adhering to that, and I don't really know where that time frame came from. But just know that if you do have an EIDL loan and you're interested in getting a PPP loan, there are still PPP funds available and you can move forward with that. Something else I want to mention is initially when all these loan programs came out, it was discussed widely about the fact that there's forgiveness under PPP. There's also forgiveness of that EIDL grant up to $10,000 based on your employee headcount. And everyone had sort of assumed that you could receive full forgiveness under both loan programs. And what we're seeing based on the regulations and also based on the loan forgiveness application itself is that you can receive loan forgiveness under one or the other, but not both. So for instance, if you obtain an EIDL grant of $5,000 and you go to apply for a PPP loan, even if you didn't get the full EIDL loan, and even if you're not rolling your EIDL loan into the PPP loan, let's say you have them as two separate loans, you are not permitted to include that EIDL grant into the calculation of your maximum loan amount. And you also then on the back end have to reduce your total eligible forgiveness by that EIDL grant amount. So it's taking it out of the forgiveness and deducting it. So it's basically dinging you for that EIDL grant, and it is trying to get at the fact that they want to give you some forgiveness, but they're not going to let you get a windfall under both programs. Mm-hmm. And something else I want to note that a lot of borrowers have been asking about is, if I used any portion of my EIDL loan for payroll costs, do I then have to roll it into the PPP loan? And yes, you do. So if even just $5 was used for payroll costs, you now, in order to get the PPP loan, are going to have to refinance that EIDL loan.
Mm-hmm. Jackie, what was the time frame reference there? There was something to do with April 3rd as the time frame. Can you tell me about that?
So the regulations state currently that if you received an EIDL loan if it was funded between January 31st and April 3rd, that you can qualify for a PPP loan. But it didn't specifically state that if you received an EIDL loan outside of that time frame, that you would not qualify for the PPP loan. So, and I'm not seeing any guidance or other regulations that give any clarification to that point. It was just poorly drafted, I guess. So I've gone to a couple of lenders to say, hey, are you turning away PPP applicants if they've received an EIDL loan that was funded outside of this time frame? And the answer has been no. The answer is that they will still take on an EIDL loan holder even if they receive their EIDL loan outside of that time frame. So I'm just trying to clarify that even though that time frame is there and it might suggest that you're only going to be able to apply for the PPP loan if you received your EIDL funds between those two dates, it's not being implemented in practice in the loan funding practice.
Well, let me not cut you off. I'm looking at the questions and I'm typing answers and then wanting to tell people, so I should just let you finish.
Well, that's all I have on as of right now for the interplay between PPP and EIDL. Basically, you're going to get forgiveness under one, but not both. So if you got a grant, it's going to reduce your forgiveness under the PPP loan, even if you used all of your PPP funds within your covered period for the forgivable purposes. When you get to that part of the application, they're going to ask you to reduce that by the amount of any EIDL grant you received.
So if the EIDL grant wasn't used for payroll, what's the effect there? If you had no, like, realtor, no payroll, just an individual person who got the $1,000 for the head count.
So it really, the EIDL grant is not I guess the reduction of your loan forgiveness under PPP by the amount of the EIDL grant has nothing to do with what you spent those grant proceeds on. What will trigger the use of the EIDL proceeds will trigger your requirement to refinance the EIDL into the PPP if you use your EIDL funds for payroll to any extent.
Gotcha. Couple things that have come up while you guys have been talking. I want to clarify. I've been asked several times, are funds still available for PPP? Absolutely. The last number we had was just around $100 billion was still available, even when we had Kathy Collins on from Sable Palm a couple weeks ago. The bankers initially told us to expect that money to be depleted in about a week, and that just didn't happen. Keep in mind that at the time that the second round of PPP funds were available, was also during the whole upheaval about Shake Shack and Ruth's Chris and the eligibility and the certification. So people were like, I'm not going to jail over a $6,000 PPP, so let me just not do it. So I think the attractiveness of it nosedived, and you saw the popularity follow behind as people became concerned about whether or not they met those requirements. And then we had the safe harbor come out, and people got more comfortable, but still there is more money. Lee has also said, hey, I've applied for PPP and I've heard nothing from the bank. Are different banks processing and performing better or faster? Absolutely. And if you have applied with a bank and you haven't heard anything for weeks, you can switch gears. You cannot take two loans from two different banks. So if that happens, if you are at two different banks and you get funded twice, you do need to return the second batch of funds quickly, because you can't have two different loans. But you absolutely don't have to stay stuck if you're not getting performance from your bank. You certainly can move along. We've had very good success with folks who have used Sable Palm, who have quickly processed those applications and funded into people's accounts within just 2 or 3 business days. So keep in mind, money's still available. If you haven't done it, you're still able to. There's no reason not to, as long as you meet the uncertainty requirements. Terry's asking, will our office offer a price to complete the loan forgiveness application? We have been trying to work on that to see how we can help people, particularly it's going to be easier for us to help folks who have already been our tax clients. It's going to be really difficult for us. We've kicked numbers around and talked to other professionals. I've talked to folks in Ohio, where I used to work at another CPA firm, and everybody's kind of all over the map. We kind of feel like we need a little bit more information. We need the rules to stop changing so we know what we actually have to do before we could put a fair price on that. We're hoping to. We really want to be able to help, but it will just depend on how this unfolds, whether we're practically going to be able to, to help folks or not. If we're not able to offer the service to do it for you, we certainly will continue to provide the education. And that's the difference between us providing the education at no cost and then providing the actual calculations for a fee that we want it to be reasonable. We want it to be something that we can feel comfortable about, but that we also, as you can see, the risk is high here because we're playing with the rules that are changing in the game daily. So that's going to have to be something we're just not going to be able to answer yet. But as things unfold, we want to help. Most of the people on these webinars are our clients or have become clients through the process. So we want to make sure we get help in everybody's hands. We don't want anybody twisting around, but we also don't want it to be like, oh yeah, you need a CPA, so you better call us. Like, you have to do this and you can't do it without us. Now, any other topics or points, you guys, that you need to cover? I feel like if we've got it, we'll jump off. As soon as this passes the Senate, we will let you know. We'll keep you posted on what the final regulations ends up to be once that law is signed by the president. We will continue to keep you posted. If something big drops, we'll drop it too. So All right. Thursday, we're going to change things up a little bit, unless something trumps our PPP talk here. And we're going to be talking about refinancing your property, whether it's individual, your homestead, your rental properties, your commercial properties. We're going to be talking about the impact of that from a tax perspective, from a legal perspective. We've gotten a lot of questions with respect to refinancing and people not sure if it's a good idea. Does it make sense mathematically? Well, I'm planning to sell in a couple years. With changes in the tax law, Marina's going to let us know a little bit about what to expect, if that's still going to be a benefit, what's still tax deductible with those things. And keep in mind, if you do have refinancing needs, we can handle those as well. That is still a closing, and I think that sometimes gets lost in the cracks. So we'll be on Thursday about the refinancing of property rather than on PPP, unless something pops up here with the Senate. If the Senate passes, then we'll do a pop-up webinar sometime this week as well to address that. So thanks everybody for your time. We will see you on Thursday.